Africa has just done the unthinkable. For decades, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, dictated Africa's destiny. Loans that came with suffocating conditions, debt traps that chained entire nations, and policies designed to enrich the West while Africa stayed dependent. But today, that world is collapsing. A $600 billion infrastructure revolution is rewriting Africa's future. Highways, megadams, high-speed railways, and ports are being built across the continent. Not with IMF money, but with new partnerships from China, the Gulf, and Africa's own leaders. This is the dawn of a new era. The IMF is being replaced. U.S. influence is crumbling, and Africa is finally seizing control of its own future. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will shake the foundations of the global economy. For most of modern history, Africa's economy was under siege by the IMF. Let's break it down. Whenever an African nation faced a financial crisis, the IMF would swoop in with offers of emergency loans. Sounds good, right? Wrong. Those loans came with deadly strings attached. Governments were forced to slash subsidies on food and fuel, sparking riots and hunger. State-owned industries were sold off to foreign corporations at bargain prices. Currencies were devalued, making imports more expensive while exports stayed cheap for the West. And worst of all, repayment terms were structured so that debt only grew bigger year after year. By the 1980s and 1990s, Africa's debt burden had become unbearable. Countries like Zambia, Ghana, and Nigeria spent more on debt servicing than on health or education. The IMF claimed it was helping Africa stabilize. But in reality, it was locking Africa into dependency. Washington used the IMF as a tool to control policy, punish resistant governments, and keep Africa tethered to Western dominance. This was the IMF trap. And for decades, there was no way out. But in the 21st century, the ground began to shift. Africa found new partners who weren't lecturing about austerity, but building actual infrastructure. China stepped in first. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China poured tens of billions into Africa. The Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway in Kenya, a $4 billion project linking the capital to the coast. The Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, giving landlocked Ethiopia direct access to the sea. Mega highways in Nigeria, Angola, and Tanzania. These were real projects, not just loans on paper. Trains ran. Roads connected cities. Ports expanded trade. The Gulf states followed. The UAE invested in African ports. Saudi Arabia financed massive agriculture projects, and Qatar injected capital into new power plants. And perhaps most importantly, Africa began investing in itself. The African Union, Afreximbank, and AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, created a framework where African countries could trade and build with each other. By 2023, Africa had mobilized over $600 billion in infrastructure investment. This wasn't aid. This wasn't IMF conditionality. This was partnership and ownership. So what does $600 billion in infrastructure look like? Let's take a tour. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, $5 billion. The largest hydroelectric project in Africa, generating 6,500 megawatts of electricity. Enough to power Ethiopia and sell excess power to Sudan, Djibouti, and Kenya. A direct challenge to Western energy dominance. The Lagos-Ibadan Railway in Nigeria, built with Chinese financing. It slashed travel times, cut transport costs, and boosted commerce for millions of people. The Lamu Port South Sudan-Ethiopia Transport Corridor, LAPSET, a mega network of highways, pipelines, and railways linking East Africa together. Bagamoyo Port, Tanzania, designed to be one of the largest ports in Africa, competing with Dubai and Singapore as a global logistics hub. The North-South Corridor, a trans-African highway project linking Cape Town to Cairo. These aren't symbolic projects. They're the backbone of a new economy. They connect African nations to each other, lower the cost of doing business, and attract investment that IMF loans never could. This is the infrastructure of independence. With projects like these, the IMF is becoming irrelevant. When Ghana faced a financial crisis, instead of begging the IMF, it explored gold-backed loan structures and turned to new bilateral partners. When Zambia was on the edge of bankruptcy, China and other lenders stepped in to restructure debt, while the IMF scrambled to stay in the game. When Nigeria needed new railways, it didn't wait for IMF approval. It went east. The IMF, once the global financial policeman, is losing its power. Its model of conditional loans simply can't compete with real infrastructure on the ground. For the first time in modern history, African leaders can look the IMF in the eye and say, "We don't need you anymore." And this is where it gets even more explosive. The U.S. is losing leverage. For decades, America used the IMF to dictate policy across Africa. Want a loan? Cut subsidies. Want debt relief? Privatize your industries. Want our approval? Vote with us at the UN. But that leverage depended on there being no alternative. Now there is. China is Africa's largest trading partner. The Gulf states are building Africa's ports and refineries. BRICS is pushing for alternative financial systems. AFCFTA is creating the world's largest free trade zone. The US no longer has a monopoly, and that terrifies Washington. Because the IMF wasn't just about money. It was about control. And with Africa's infrastructure revolution, that control is slipping away. This $600 billion revolution is not just an African story. It's a global story. It means that Africa can trade with Asia, Europe, and the Gulf without U.S. permission. Africa can build industry powered by African dams, not IMF loans. Africa can say no to debt traps and yes to partnerships. It also means that the unipolar world, where the U.S. and IMF dictated terms, is gone. We are entering a multipolar era. Africa is rising. The IMF is shrinking. And the balance of power is tilting. Africa's $600 billion infrastructure revolution is not just about steel, concrete, and highways. It's about freedom. It's about ending financial slavery. It's about rejecting debt dependency. It's about a continent standing tall and saying, "We will build our own future." The IMF once decided Africa's fate. Today, Africa decides for itself. The US once controlled Africa through financial leverage. Today, that leverage is gone. The only question now is, will the West accept this new reality, or will it fight to keep Africa in chains? Because ready or not, a new Africa has arrived, and the world will never be the same again.